All right. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show. And we've got the prolific and erudite George Gammon in his vehicle. And better watch out. It looks like a fairly large vehicle. Al Gore will be after him for poisoning the world with carbon.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, you can't get pissed at me. It's a rental car, so he's got to get mad at Hertz or whatever. They shouldn't have bailed out all the junk debt. We wouldn't have to deal with all these rental car companies that shouldn't be in business or should have been taken over by someone more prudent.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that'll never happen. I always say when people talk about regulation that the greatest regulation is failure. But
Yeah, that's
failure
right.
of the 1%, so to speak, is not allowed anymore. It's only the poor schnook who can't open his coffee shop because the government Gestapo has him down. In fact, I had that guy on my show a few days ago, the priest in Alberta, who went
Mm.
viral all over television because the police came into his church, Pastor Pulaski.
Mm.
He said, "Get out, you Nazis. Nazis are not allowed in my church. Get out. You heard me. Get out. Gestapo is not allowed here. How dare you?"
Yeah.
Out these morons because they had no warrant. But there's a gutsy guy. We don't have people, George, who are willing to tell the truth anymore. We have a nation of immoral, spineless, pusillanimous pipsqueaks. What can I say? How do you like that alliteration?
Well, I think it's true. And what I've been doing just personally lately is I've been trying to try being the operative word, maximize my just personal freedom. And as you know, that's very difficult to do in today's world. And I went down to Puerto Rico, which was a complete nightmare. I mean, a total police state. It's basically martial law. I was going to spend some time there, but I was there for 24 hours. And I said, this is not going to happen. So I went to Florida. And in the process, I've just been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of research. So I went back and actually studied the propaganda techniques used by the Germans prior to World War II, the Nazi Germany, to try to understand what they did and if I could see some similarities in what's happening today, and maybe just get an idea of where the central planners are trying to take this in the future. I'm not implying that the central planners are Nazis. That's not what I'm implying. I am implying that if you study history, they are using the same type of propaganda techniques, whether that's intentional or not. Who knows? I'm not in their mind. But one of the main things that they did, they meaning the propaganda people that were trying to push the Nazi narrative in the called the early 1930s, throughout the 1930s in Germany, is in fact, their number one objective was to get people away from prioritizing rational thought and to replace that with prioritizing an individual's feelings. So they wanted to get rid of thinking and they wanted to promote feeling. Why should we care about rational thought and critical thinking? At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because we're all human beings, and the most important thing are your feelings. How do you feel right now? That's the first thing they did, and the first strategy they employed. And then they went into manipulating the media and through a variety of techniques. And then they needed a boogeyman, which we all know the group that was the boogeyman there. But if you see what's happening in today's world, especially in the West and in the United States, I don't have to tell you that the mainstream narrative and the societal push is for the priority being the feelings. We have safe spaces now in every single college. People are arguing that words in and of themselves are equivalent to violence and should be treated so by the law because it's affecting someone's feelings to that degree. right? And then of course, if you look at any movie that's out in the theaters now, you've got to sit through a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes of just pure propaganda. It's whether it's woke, it's SJW, it's equality, whatever the buzzword is at the time, you're going to see it interjected into pretty much every single movie that you see right now. And they did the exact same thing in Germany. I also want to point out that we like to, for whatever reason, we believe that the majority of Germans were sympathetic to the Nazi Party during that time frame. That is not true. The Nazi Party actually won only 37% of the vote when they took power, because they had multiple groups. They had multiple. I forgot what the names, but it just wasn't Democrats and Republicans. It was 3 or 4 groups there, so they could win with 37% of the vote. But they were usually just a vocal minority, to the point where I remember reading stories about movie theaters and theater owners that would report to the Nazi Party, the people that were in charge of propaganda, and they would report to Hitler directly in the later 30s. And they would report that during one of these movies, it wasn't really a Nazi movie, but they would interject this propaganda that was sympathetic toward their narrative. The theater owner would say that during that 5-minute segment, the crowd would start laughing, even if it was a serious movie, because the propaganda was so blatantly ridiculous that they would just say, oh, here we go. They kind of roll their eyes, start laughing. We got to sit through the Nazi propaganda again, you see? And it's almost the exact same thing as you and I now sitting through a Star Wars movie. Okay, here we go. We got to go through the woke propaganda. Let me use the restroom and come back in 5 minutes, and hopefully it'll be over and I actually can enjoy a movie without getting this propaganda jammed down my throat from the time I wake up in the morning till the time I go to bed. So it's the exact same techniques, that's really my point, that are being used today, and for the same reason. And it's always to manipulate society to get them to do your bidding or to achieve your objectives. What those objectives are, I'll let you be the judge.
Well, I don't know if you have read the books by Professor Anthony Sutton. He's got 2 opus magnuses. One is Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and the second book is Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. And he did a damn good job documenting how the Wall Street elite were funding both sides of World War II. And there's a lot of primary source information there. And also in 1936, there was a guy who had a big influence on me named Zeev Jabotinsky. And he bought ships to take the Jews out of Europe back in 36, before the Holocaust. And he said, you either eliminate the diaspora, which refers to the Jews being dispersed throughout the world, or the diaspora will eliminate you. And the Jews threw tomatoes at him, they threw rocks at him, they kicked him out of the synagogues, and I wonder who was right. And we have this mentality today, especially with this COVID nonsense, where people say to me, well, the majority of people don't agree with you, as if somehow we take a majority vote to find the truth, or the majority of scientists don't agree with you. Oh, I didn't realize. I mean, my wife is a PhD and a postdoctorate in science. It's not a vote. Science changes every day as mistakes are made and new things are discovered. There's no such thing as a scientific majority, but this is what we've come down to. Even the DSM-3 is done by vote. Go ahead.
I'd also like to point out that the science at one point in time claimed the earth was flat.
Yeah.
The science at one point in time claimed that the sun revolved around the earth.
That's right.
So
Arthur Ashe, if you can get AIDS from a blood transfusion, because all of the so-called medical establishment was telling everybody you cannot get AIDS from blood transfusion. And the tennis champion, Arthur Ashe, goes in for heart surgery and gets AIDS from a blood transfusion and dies. So much for the science. So
Yeah.
by the way, I'm glad you mentioned Puerto Rico. All of my friends are writing to me and saying, ask George Gammon, where can we go? Since you mentioned Puerto Rico, and I know you have a lot of knowledge of South and Central America, where can they go?
Well, as far as personal freedom right now, I think your best bet's Florida. I mean, in anywhere in the world other than Tanzania. I think Tanzania would be number one if you could get there. I was seriously considering going there, but I don't want to deal with a 30-hour flight right now with all the mask requirements and the the draconian measures that the airports are taking right now. It'd just be completely unbearable. But I was on the brink. I was pushed so far in Puerto Rico that I was almost going to hop on a flight to Miami and then try to just figure out how to get there. But what I did instead, especially because I have a live event in June, I thought, man, if I go to Tanzania now, I'm going to have to come back in June. That's going to be a big pain in the butt. So what I did is I looked for counties in Florida that have that were the first to get rid of their mask mandates. So, DeSantis, I think, took it out for the entire state, but then it's still up to the county. And I found that Sarasota County got rid of their mask mandate all the way back in, I believe it was January of this year. So I thought, okay, well, that's been quite a while now. Hopefully people have gotten kind of reacclimated to a world where, you're not just wearing a mask as soon as you walk out the front door. And so I went to Sarasota and it was pretty good there. But oddly enough, I went down to Naples. I took the advice of my sister, and Naples is fantastic. Fantastic. I don't know why, for whatever reason, but there's very, very low compliance. And what's great about Naples too is there's this grocery store that everyone, if they're in the area, I don't care if you're an hour away, you should drive just to check out. It's called Seed to Table. And you would really love it because the owners are definitely libertarian, that's for sure. And it's this huge mega complex. I mean, it's a grocery store the size of like a Bass Pro Shop or a Cabela's or something like that. And they've got all these bars and live music, but it's organic food, very similar to just the most giant Whole Foods you've ever seen in your life. But the mask sign that they have on the door right before you go in isn't wear your mask, wear your mask, wear your mask. And it's not make sure your mask is over your nose. This is the way you wear one. This is the way you isn't, it isn't the barking all of these orders at you. But what it is it says, here's the rules. You're supposed to wear a mask, but if you have a pre-existing health condition, we can't force you to wear a mask. And because of, I think they mentioned the Fourth Amendment, we can't ask you if you have a health condition. So we'll just assume that if you're not wearing your mask, that you have a health condition, and we thank you for coming to our store and giving us your business in these difficult times, right? So you go in there, and basically what they're saying is you don't have to wear a mask, right?
Right, I get
so
it.
You go in there, and the place is packed with people. I mean, packed, and very, very few people are actually wearing a mask. The workers are not wearing a mask. The people preparing your food, the people making your coffee or drinks, everything, very few people. But there are some people there that choose to wear a mask. And this is, in my opinion, the ideal. Not that no one's wearing a mask. I'm not anti-mask. I'm anti-mask mandate. I think it should be left up to the individual to make their own decisions as to what they want to do considering their health and weigh the probabilities on their own. It shouldn't come from government dictate. And Naples and this store is a perfect example of that. So bottom line is, if someone in the United States or within travel distance can get to Florida and hang out for 6 months, I think you're going to find the most amount of freedom right around that Naples area. There, a lot of places in Florida are good. I was just in West Palm Beach this last weekend. It was pretty good there. Miami is still a little draconian.
But George, you remember the guy who almost won as governor of Florida, and then he was found in a homosexual crack house?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. And he almost won. He only lost by a few percentage. What happens when another one of him or any of these freaks become the new governor? Everything changes.
Yeah, that's right. I will say one thing though, because I'm like you, I'm very critical of politicians in general. I usually just throw a blanket statement and say they're all just the bottom of the barrel. They're all kind of the dregs of society for a variety of reasons. But I do need to give props to the governor here, and I don't know him personally. I've never talked to him, but I was listening to the Tom Woods show the other day, and Tom had one of the doctors that was the author, or one of the authors of the Barrington Declaration, and DeSantis actually called him personally and said, "Hey, would you mind taking an hour out of your schedule and just walking me through, kind of what's going on here?" This was way back, probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 8 months ago, something like that. And this doctor is obviously a genius level intellect, and the guy is incredibly smart. You can tell that just by the interview with Tom. And the doctor said he was completely blown away by the degree to which DeSantis understood the science and quote unquote, and the actual reports that he had actually studied himself as a doctor, trying to figure out. He said he really couldn't articulate how impressed he was with DeSantis, not only his decision-making process, but how thoroughly he read all the research on both sides. So in my opinion, there's very, very few politicians that are going to do that. Basically, they're just going to say, they're going to go to their PR people and say, okay, what's going to get me the most votes? Okay, I want to do that. They have no morals. They have no ethics. They have no backbone. They have no spine. They have no principled North Star, if you will, like Ron Paul. They're just kind of, what's going to get me the most votes? Okay, great. Let's do that. But according to what this gentleman was saying, this doctor, DeSantis is not that way. So I'm not saying he's perfect, but for heaven's sakes, at least he's got some principles.
Right. But of course, he'll be out of office. And what comes next? That's my quandary.
Well, that's why, in my opinion, people should, regardless of whether you're on the left or the right, you should want smaller government. You should be a champion of the Constitution, because the Constitution is what protects us from them. We want to decentralize that power as much as we possibly can, because the people on the left may have someone in office right now that they think is doing the right thing and they really agree with. But to your point, if you give this person exponentially more power, although they're doing what you like right now, the next guy is going to do something that you hate.
Yeah.
The next guy or gal is going to be someone that you really dislike, and they're probably going to be taking that power that you gave the last guy and using it against you, the person that voted for the last guy to have all the power in the first place. And I think if the people on the left and the right just thought that through, we would have a much better political system that really paid a lot more attention to what they should pay attention to, which is the United States Constitution.
Well, what you just said is supported by St. Thomas More, that the famous Academy Award winning movie that got like 8 Academy Awards was called A Man for All Seasons. And in that movie, they're trying to get him to prosecute someone they don't like. And he doesn't like either. And he says, I have to follow the law. And
That's right.
He replied, no, when you need to get the devil, you do whatever you need to do in order to get him. And he responded, I would represent, because he was an attorney also, he said, I'd represent the devil to make sure that this is not at one time or another turned on you.
That's right.
And
That's
people
right.
don't understand that concept. I say this to so-called Republicans, who call themselves conservatives. I don't know what there is to conserve anymore, but they call themselves conservatives. And I tell them all the time, you better watch out when you support the Patriot Act and you support George Bush and all these other creeps, because you think they're good. But well, wait till Hillary or wait till Biden takes over and has that power you've allowed them to take.
That's right. And I think that's human nature to just think that, well, we should give all the power as long as they're doing my bidding. But then they don't think about the future. An example, that little story. In grade school, I went to a private school that was run by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay. So for those of those your viewers who don't know Seventh-day, it's basically the Christian, but they go to church on Saturday. Okay.
Right.
So one of their things that these teachers would try to instill in you is that at some point in time, there's going to be a law that's going to restrict our ability to go to church on Saturday. They're going to have a Sunday law that's going to force everyone to go to church on Sunday. And we're going to have to, hide out in caves or whatever it is, just to be able to practice our faith of going to church on Saturday. At the same time, these same teachers would tell us that this was in call it the early 80s or something like that. They would say that there are all these satanic cults out there, and we really have to be concerned with the satanic cults, and that we need to create laws so these satanic cults can't practice, because they're going to bring down society. And we need to do everything we can, just personally and legally, to make sure that these cults don't exist, or to eradicate them from society. And even as a kid, even at 9 and 10 years old, which is about my age back then, I would scratch my head and say, wait a minute here, that doesn't make sense, because isn't it the same law that allows these satanic cults to worship whomever they want to worship are the exact same laws that are currently allowing us to go to church on Saturday? And if we create laws to ban the Satan worshipers or whatever, isn't that law going to be used against us? Isn't that the very law that you're talking about in the future that will prevent us from going to church on Saturday and making us worship out in caves and whatnot? But what's amazing is that back then, a 9-year-old can see that, but all of these teachers that were in their 50s and 60s, it never dawned on them that that was the case. Maybe it's the same thing today.
Well, they were probably members of the satanic cult, so
I would go that far. They were nice people, but...
You'd be surprised. You saw what they did in LA with the children, turning them into drag queens in the nightclub this week. They took about little kids.
Well, that's terrible. Yeah, this whole thing with that just goes into this, that goes back to what they're doing in Nazi Germany, and that they're taking the priority away from critical thinking and putting it on your feelings, to this extent that if you have an 8-year-old that wakes up and an 8-year-old boy that wakes up and says, oh, I feel like a girl today or whatever, oh, we better start the sex change process. I mean, it's just complete insanity that what we're doing, and it's getting worse. It's getting much, much worse. But I will say one thing, trying to be more optimistic, is one of the books that I've been just reviewing over and over and over again lately because of my quest for personal liberty is The Road to Serfdom by Hayek. And he points out that I've got this version where he goes, there's a lot of footnotes and a lot of his comments later on after the book was published, decades later. And he talks about how he wrote the book because he is very concerned that coming out of World War II, there would be a move and a push towards central planning in the economy. And that would put us on the road to serfdom. Because he thought, okay, well, these groups in society at large is going to say, well, my goodness gracious, we went into World War II and we defeated the Japanese, we defeated the Germans, whatever the narrative was. And we did that by the government controlling everything. And look at how well it worked. So it works so well in war. Why wouldn't it work well if the government just controlled the economy? And so that this was very popular, obviously, in Russia, in the UK, and the United States at the time. So Hayek wanted a book as to act as a counter narrative. And he said that later on, the United States, although that was very, very popular, that idea out of World War II, it kind of fizzled out. A decade later, it really wasn't there, especially going into the 1950s. Where in the UK, it kind of held on a little bit more, and they didn't go full socialist, but they were a lot less laissez-faire than the United States decided to, the path they decided to take. And then in Russia, we know what happened there. So his point was, just because you're on the road to serfdom, it doesn't mean that it's a foregone conclusion. It's still the destiny, to a certain degree, is still up to the people, but they have to be cognizant. And it really revolves, I think, around culture. And if you don't educate people, and that's why guys that are and gals that are doing what you're doing with the show and on YouTube and podcasts, why it's so crucial in today's world that we reach as many people as possible and tell them the drawbacks to socialism or welfarism, whichever term you want to use, because a lot of people say, oh, well, look at Sweden, look at Denmark. They're not socialists, meaning they don't own the means of production, but they just have high taxes and high welfare. Well, Hayek pointed that out. He made the distinction in his footnotes in with The Road to Serfdom. And he says both philosophies or both economies put you onto the road to serfdom. It's just a matter of timing. If the government owns the means of production, you're going to get there a lot quicker. But you can go a different direction, like he pointed out with the UK and the United States. So if we keep promoting these ideas of free market capitalism and show people the benefits and show the people on the left and the right that the path they're on right now with more and more and more government, regardless of whether it's in the name of free market capitalism, is putting us on that road to serfdom, which inevitably will take us to totalitarianism.
A teacher recently said to me, and she teaches elementary school, and I won't mention her name because she'll probably lose her job if I do. She said to me, Bob, as informed as you are about what is going on in the schools, and as forceful as you are with your own kids, or at least the way you were before they went on their own, you still could not overcome how bad it is today. It is nonstop brainwashing.
Yeah.
8 a.m. until 3. All get. I have another friend who's a teacher and teaches at a high school. And she sends me all of the professional development courses that they have to take every week. And all it is white people are terrible. They have privilege. It's just nonstop. The whole zeitgeist is dominated. There is no other voice. And any teacher that dares open their mouth and disagree is finito, game over.
You're right.
And you cannot overcome that unless you do what I did, which was homeschool. But if you let them into school, the game is over. If they go to college, the game is over. And now even the churches and the synagogues are being taken over by the same social justice. I call it socialist injustice. This cult, this adrenochrome socialism drinking crowd, the COVID cult. There is very few people willing to talk like you and willing to talk like me. Somebody was arguing with me yesterday. Oh, Bob, you're wrong. America is not becoming a fascist state, but you better watch out what you're saying because you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
America's not a fascist state, but I got to watch out what I'm saying. And we've got to be like that priest I mentioned. This priest, God bless this man. He used to be a very wealthy businessman. And he went into the streets and started feeding the homeless, actually doing something instead of the virtual signaling crap that you get
Right.
today. And
Yeah.
what happened to him? He was arrested for violating regulations on food. He didn't get inspectors before he fed starving people. This is what is happening. And everyone's afraid of their job. Oh, they're going to go after your kids. People said that to me all the time. My God, how do you talk the way you talk? They're going to go after your kids. And I said, you know what? If you have a fear of God, which Judaism says is the beginning of all wisdom, I mean, real Judaism, not the crap you hear from liberal Jews who couldn't be further away from Judaism.
Right.
If you don't have the guts to do as you do and stand up to this and to try to tell the truth as best as you can, we're done. We're done. And I always say that a pessimist rather, is just an optimist who knows the facts.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to critical thinking, because you talk about truth and you hit the nail on the head. But in order to find the truth, we just have to do the opposite of what they were doing in Nazi Germany, as far as the propagandists. We have to just deprioritize the feeling component, and understand that that's our nature as human beings, and we need to prioritize critical thinking and rigorous intellectual debate. And we need to go back, and it's not that difficult. When I was growing up, every little kid gets picked on when they're young. I mean, in first grade, second grade, sometimes you're picking on kids, sometimes they're picking on you, but a lot of things are said throughout the years that are going to hurt your feelings. That's the way the world works. And remember or at least when I was growing up, whenever you would go to the teacher or your parents and you would be upset over something someone said, maybe they called you a name or something like that, what they would always say to me is, George, don't give that person power over your emotional state, because if that person is picking on you and it's upsetting you, then you're giving them power and control over how you feel. Ignore them. Ignore it. It doesn't matter. And if you ignore them, then you take back the control. And what's the old saying? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Yeah. Why was it that was so predominant with the teachers and the school system and with the parents when I was growing up? But now it's the complete opposite.
Did you know Aaron Russo? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, and ironically, what we're doing is we're creating this victim culture and this victim mentality that all these people are complaining about words that are being used. But at the same point, if you really think it through, what they're doing is they're giving power to those individuals who are using the words that they don't like. So I think a message of empowerment, ironically, is saying, hey, listen, use whatever words you want. I don't care how politically incorrect they are. I don't care, because it's not going to affect my state of mind. And I'm going to still go out there and create, and go after my goals and achieve my objectives, regardless of the names you call me or your belief system. That's a message of empowerment to those people who are maybe victimized or have less opportunity. And we're just switching it to where, we're creating an environment where they're just getting stuck in a rut and they can't get out because they don't get off the couch and do anything, because they believe that they don't have control over their destiny. The control is with someone else that's calling them the names, and therefore they have to vote someone in office or give the government more power. And that's the only way that they're going to get ahead in life.
Did you know Aaron Russo?
No.
He produced the movie Trading Places, remember, with Eddie Murphy?
Oh yeah, I love that. And Dan Aykroyd. Yeah, I really
Yeah.
like that movie. That was
He
great.
also produced Teachers. He was Bette Midler's manager. Well, Aaron was originally a typical Democratic liberal, but later on in life, he had the crap beat out of him by the police. They really gave him a good beating for no reason.
Hmm.
And he became a libertarian. And he made this movie, America from Freedom to Fascism, which you
Hmm.
can see on YouTube. And I had the honor of spending one of his last weeks before he died. In fact, it still kills me to think about him. Now, Aaron became friends with Nicholas Rockefeller
Hmm.
and the Rockefeller brothers because the very super rich like to have Hollywood celebrities or celebrities of any kind as trophies for their parties. You know, it's good for their ego to have movie stars and producers. So Nick says to Aaron, I'd like you to join my organization. And Aaron says, what are you talking about? What organization? He says, the CFR. And Aaron says, what's the CFR? And he says, you don't know what the CFR is? Come on. He says, what do you think of women's lib? And Aaron, coming from that milieu, unlike me, was very socially liberal. And Aaron said, well, I think women should have equal pay for equal work. And Rockefeller looked at him and said, Aaron, are you really that stupid? Do you think we funded Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan with millions and millions of dollars of Rockefeller money because we want women to get equal pay? And he said, we control a bank, and the bank is called the Federal Reserve. And we want women in the workforce. We want women paying income taxes, and we want women out of the house, because as soon as we can do that, we control their kids, because we control the media, the educational system, every conduit of information we control. And Aaron was appalled listening to that kind of psychopathic evil. There's no compassion in their thought. They don't have empathy. They're like aliens. And Aaron made this movie to expose it, but unfortunately, it never got the play that it deserves. It's an incredible documentary. It's all over YouTube.
Yeah, but again, that strategy goes back to Nazi Germany as well.
Yeah.
You know, they go into the schools. In fact, the way they did it is they engineered this very inexpensive radio, because at the time having a radio in Germany was kind of a novelty, like only kind of rich people did. But they engineered a very cheap radio that could be used in every single classroom, and that pretty much every German could buy. So then they had a way to disseminate their information and their propaganda, which, by the way, it wasn't all just Hitler speeches. It was just entertainment, it was plays, it was music, it was theater. It just had that overtone of propaganda, the exact same things that you see today. And so they attacked, or they targeted, let's say, the schools, the media, and then they got people away from thinking and into feeling. And again, it's the exact same thing we're seeing today.
Tell us about what you've been doing. I know we got to wind this down, so I want to just get out a few things. What are you doing with Lynn Alden and the program you have that I saw your YouTube video about? And I subscribe to Lynn Alden, and she's very sharp.
Lynn is one of the smartest people on the planet Earth. And I think that in the macro space and in finance, you're not going to find a person that's as well researched as Lynn. I mean, I cannot say enough good things about her, and anyone that follows her on Twitter or has seen her content before, I think would have to agree. But I partner with Lynn and another gentleman by the name of Chris McIntosh, who's a hedge fund manager, in an online product that we call Rebel Capitalist Pro. So it's just a monthly service that it's like an online forum where people can interact and talk, ask questions, and we have live streams weekly, where you can go on there and ask questions to the pros, whether it's, I wouldn't consider myself a pro, but whether it's me or Lynn or Chris, and then it has their research that they use to make their own investment decisions. We include their weekly or bi-weekly research in the forum as well, that you can download and read. So that's what I do with Lynn. But honestly, even more than that, I use Lynn as a sounding board for a lot of my ideas and for a lot of my whiteboard videos. If I'm trying to think through something that's very complex and I'm having a hard time, such as if bank reserves are used to buy financial assets. That's a debate that goes back and forth with people on FinTwit. And if you really get down into the nitty gritty, there is no definitive answer. So you've just got to think through the balance sheets of the banking system and then use M2. It gets really tough to figure it out. But anyway, I'll call up Lynn and just say, hey, what do you think about this? And we'll go back and forth for 15 minutes or a half hour. And every single time I talk to her, my thinking is that much more clear. And but Lynn is just a great person. I can't say enough good things about her. And if you know Lynn's backstory and about her childhood, which she's written about in the past, which I won't go into here, I'd strongly suggest everyone looking into that. It's online. You'll have so much more respect for her than you even have right now. She's just an amazing person.
Well, I found out about her through a guy who you should be on his show, Jay Taylor. You know him?
No.
He has a show called Turning Hard Times into Good Times, and a financial internet network. And she is on like every few weeks. That's how I found out about her. And I subscribe to her stuff. And she is a geek, and she's great. She's great at it. It's really impressive. Also, tell the viewers what's going on with your live event later on, a few months from now.
Yeah, so Rebel Capitalist Live, which is actually a live event. It's not just live on Zoom or Skype or something like that. It's actually humans meeting one another and interacting, believe it or not. And a lot of the people that I interview for Rebel Capitalist Pro, they're going to be there live speaking. People like Robert Kiyosaki, like Mark Moss, Ken McElroy, Jason Hartman, Lynette Zhang. Oh, I'm sure a bunch of people. You have to go to Rebel Capitalist Live and you'll see it's Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, Robert Breedlove. So a lot of people in the macro space, gold, real estate, Bitcoin. I try to bring a kind of a eclectic group of all the people I speak with, and it's just going to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. But going back to what we were talking about on how important the law is, one thing that I'm doing currently with Robert Barnes is we are legally going after the Fed through the FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act, to try to get them to divulge information on what they did back in 2020, which in my opinion is a blatant violation of the law, of the Federal Reserve Act. And we're assuming that they're going to tell us to pound sand. So what we'll do is we'll sue them using the FOIA if they don't give us those documents. And that's going to take about a year. I put up about 62,000 for it. Then we did a GoFundMe campaign for the other 37 or so to get us up to the 100,000 that we need for that first stage. Robert's in the process of requesting the information now. But we're doing that for several reasons. First and foremost, to push back a little against these central planners, and at the very least remind them that there is a law and they are not above the law, and that there's people out there that are paying attention to the fact that they're out there buying corporate debt or junk debt. And even though they're doing it through a special purpose vehicle, if you look at the spirit of the law, it is the antithesis of what the Fed was set up to do. And just because CNBC or Bloomberg won't call them out on it, there's people in the real world that will. and that will stand up for the law, because like I said, at the end of the day, that's what protects us from the Federal Reserve. That's what protects us from the government, is the law itself. And then hopefully if we can create some if people start to understand, and if people get more interested in what the Fed does, and how detrimental, and how the artificially low interest rates and quantitative easing distorts the economy, creates a misallocation of resources and malinvestment, and then they kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together and say, wait a minute here, okay, these artificially low interest rates, they're trying to create inflation. Well, that means they're trying to make me pay higher prices every single year. And if I do that, then I'm going to have to become a speculator, because the only way that I can get ahead is not by saving money, but it's actually going out there and becoming a gambler and speculating. And what negative consequences does that have for not only society, but the poor and middle class? So hopefully we can create this more awareness that will take people down that rabbit hole and start to study, whether it's Austrian economics or just common sense economics, and really create a movement that is that understands how important the law is, and is able to push back on the central planners, not just the Fed, but the politicians as well.
What about Doug Casey's recommendations about South America
Well,
moving there?
yeah, I think the place he has set up is great. La Estancia, I believe it's called. And I was looking into that. And the great thing about where Doug is set up is it's like 2 hours away from the nearest even little town, not just Buenos Aires, but it is in the middle of nowhere. But he's got all the conveniences that you'd want. He's got polo fields, golf courses, vineyards, wineries. So if you're someone that's really worried about it hitting the fan big time in the United States because the direction we are going, that's a great place, if you've got some financial resources, to have like a bug out place where you could go sit back for a year or two and just not be in the middle of the firing zone, if you will. And it sounds crazy to say that, but look at what we saw in 2020. Look at the riots. Look at what's happening as a result of the looting and the riots. How the law today is being ignored, because I think a lot of the people that are supposed to uphold the law are really concerned with the blowback from the out of control mob if they make a decision in favor of the law. So, that takes you down a very, very slippery slope. And it's if I was someone, especially that was raising kids right now, I would want to be in some sort of community that was kind of in the middle of nowhere, that was surrounded by people who saw the world the way I do, that had the same ideals and the same priorities.
I'll leave you with this thought, and I thank you very much for this interesting interview and all you do. When Aaron was dying, he had come from Beverly Hills and he was staying at the Pierre Hotel. I'm talking about Aaron Russo.
Yeah.
And I could tell he didn't have much to go. And I knew he was not religious. He was a Jew. And I asked him, as a favor to me, I coaxed it, I expressed it in that manner. And I said, would you put on tefillin? I don't know if you've seen when Jews pray, they put on leather straps around their arm and around their head with a box that has part of the Holy Scrolls inside. Every Jew is supposed to do that 6 times a week. And this was foreign to him. And I asked him, as a favor to me, would you allow a rabbi to come and pray for you? And he said, sure, Bob. He was a very open-minded type of guy. So the rabbi came and prayed for him. And then I drove him to Kennedy Airport to go back to Beverly Hills. And he gave me a very big hug. And he was very moved by the whole thing. And he said, Bob, thank you for being a champion for freedom. And
Yeah.
well, I say the same thing to you. Thank you sincerely. And people who know me know I say what I think. Thank you very much for being a champion of freedom and knowledge and integrity. And hopefully we'll stay in touch. And I want to come down to that live event. What's the date for it in the South Florida?
It's Miami, June 11th through the 13th.
Great. All right. Well, go to Rebel Capitalist on YouTube. George Gammon. Thanks a lot, George.
Thank you very much for having me. And I think, as I concluded last time, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.